Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I paid for a dark web file that described a secret Russian experiment to create super soldiers. One of the failures was documented near my state. Okay, so before I get into this, I just want to say that I'm not one of those people who constantly messes around on the dark web. Yeah, I've heard all the horror stories, and sure, I've dipped my toe in out of curiosity, but I'm not a regular visitor. This all started as a dumb dare in a group chat with some friends. You know, those late night Discord calls where everyone's trying to outdo each other with weird internet rabbit holes. Yeah, one of those. We were talking about creepy stuff we'd heard online, stories about cursed websites, weird videos on YouTube that vanish after you watch them, and of course, the dark web. Someone brought up those infamous files you can buy, classified government experiments, hacked CCTV footage of eerie places, you name it. Honestly, it sounded like complete BS to me. But then someone in the group, Sam, claimed he knew how to access the real stuff. He dropped a link to a hidden marketplace, gave some sketchy instructions, and dared anyone to actually buy something. I laughed it off at first, but then Sam said something that got to me. Bet you wouldn't last 2 minutes on there, dude. You're too scared. Now, I don't consider myself easily scared. I mean, I love horror movies, haunted houses, all that. So I figured, what's the harm? Worst case scenario, I waste some Bitcoin on a nonsense file, right? I followed the link to the marketplace, and it was exactly what you'd imagine. A black screen with plain white text and an ominous vibe. There were listings for everything, stolen credit cards, blueprints to random buildings, even cursed items, whatever that means. But then I saw the section Sam was talking about, government archives. Most of the files had generic names like MK Ultra case notes or Area 51 autopsy logs. But one caught my eye. Project Severed Winter failed super soldier experiment. The description was brief. Declassified report from a Cold War era experiment conducted by Soviet scientists. Document includes incident photos, medical data, and details on the failed subject. Location of one documented sighting in the United States included. It was 0.1 Bitcoin, about $2,500 at the time. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the thrill of proving Sam wrong. Or maybe I just wanted something cool to share with the group. Either way, I bought it. The file downloaded as a massive .zip folder. When I opened it, my heart immediately started racing. This wasn't some fake creepypasta or poorly photoshopped document. It looked real. There were scans of old typewritten reports with redacted sections, photos of men in lab coats standing over what looked like giant tanks filled with cloudy liquid, and pages of medical jargon I couldn't begin to understand. But the thing that really got to me was the incident report. It described an experiment conducted in the late 70s at a remote Siberian facility. The goal was to create genetically enhanced soldiers, stronger, faster, immune to fear, pain, and even cold. They experimented on volunteers at first, but when the volunteers started deteriorating, they switched to prisoners. The report didn't go into much detail about what exactly went wrong, but it mentioned one subject, specimen W13, who was considered the biggest failure. W13 didn't just deteriorate, it changed. The word inhuman came up multiple times, along with phrases like hyperaggression and uncontrollable behavioral shifts. They tried to terminate W13, but according to the report, it escaped during a containment breach. Here's the part that made my stomach drop. The report mentioned sightings of W13 decades later in various locations around the world. Most of the sightings were in Russia or Eastern Europe, but one was in the United States, just 3 states away from me. I stared at my screen, feeling that weird mix of excitement and dread you get when you know you've stumbled onto something you shouldn't have. I didn't even notice how late it had gotten until my phone buzzed with a text from Sam. "Yo, did you chicken out, or what?" I thought about lying, but instead, I sent him a screenshot of one of the photos from the file. A grainy black and white image of a humanoid figure crouched in a snowstorm. Its proportions were all wrong, too long, too thin, with something like spikes or protrusions sticking out of its back. The caption under the photo read, "Specimen W13, 1982, sighting near Ural Mountains." Sam's response came almost immediately. "WTF is that? You seriously paid for that?" I didn't reply. I was too busy scrolling through the rest of the file, trying to make sense of it. One document, labeled Post-Sighting Interview, caught my attention. It was an account from a truck driver who claimed to have seen W13 in the US in the early 2000s. He described a figure crossing a highway in the dead of night. It moved on all 4s at first, but then stood upright, towering over the road signs. He said its eyes reflected red in his headlights. The interview ended with a note. Driver reported missing 2 weeks later. Vehicle found abandoned 15 miles from sighting location. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop myself. I googled the location mentioned in the report, a stretch of forested highway near a small town. It was only about a 6-hour drive from where I lived. That's when I made my second stupid decision. I decided to go there. I know. This is the part where everyone reading is probably screaming, "Why would you do that?" But in the moment, it didn't seem that crazy. I figured it would just be an empty road, maybe a creepy story, to tell my friends later. Plus, I was already in too deep. I couldn't stop thinking about W13, and I needed to know if there was any truth to this. The next day, I packed my car, grabbed my camera, because obviously I was going to document this, and hit the road. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The drive started out normal, just me, my car, and Spotify. I queued up some podcasts to distract myself, but they barely registered. My mind kept drifting back to that file, the photos, the documents, and most of all, that one eyewitness report about the truck driver who disappeared. The location I was heading to wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot. It was some forgotten stretch of Route 49, a 2-lane highway that cut through the kind of forests you only see in survival movies. The kind where the trees are so thick they block out the sun. Google Maps showed nothing around for miles except a single gas station, which I figured would be my last stop before I entered no man's land. When I pulled into the gas station, it was exactly as run down as I'd imagined. Flickering neon sign, a single rusted pump, and a little convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. There was an old guy behind the counter, maybe late 60s, wearing a plaid shirt and one of those mesh trucker hats. I grabbed a couple bottles of water, a Red Bull, and a bag of chips. When I went to pay, the guy squinted at me like he was trying to figure out why someone like me, 20-something, wearing a hoodie and sneakers, would end up all the way out here. "You heading somewhere?" he asked, his voice dry and slow, like he didn't talk much. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just passing through." His eyes narrowed. "Ain't much out here except trees. And trouble." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, well, I like quiet places." He didn't laugh back. Instead, he leaned on the counter and lowered his voice. "Listen, I don't know what you're looking for, but if you're heading down Route 49, you best keep your eyes on the road. And if you see anything strange, don't stop. Just keep driving." My stomach twisted. "What kind of strange?" He stared at me for a long time before saying, "Just don't stop." I paid and left without asking more. Route 49 was even creepier than I'd expected. No other cars, no streetlights, just my headlights, cutting through the dark and the occasional rustle of trees in the wind. My GPS lost signal about 20 minutes in, but it didn't matter. There was only one direction to go: forward. After about an hour, I started to get that weird feeling you get when you know you're being watched. It wasn't anything obvious, just this growing sense of unease, like the darkness outside wasn't just empty space. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something behind me. Nothing. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer. It darted across the road so fast I almost didn't register it. But when I replayed the image in my head, I realized it wasn't shaped like a deer. It was too big, and the way it moved was wrong. The legs bent the wrong way, like they were broken. I slowed down, my heart racing. My camera was on the passenger seat, and I debated grabbing it, but something in the back of my mind told me not to. As I kept driving, I noticed something else. The trees on either side of the road didn't look normal anymore. The branches were twisted, gnarled, and clawing toward the sky like frozen hands. Some of the trunks were scarred with deep gouges, as if something with massive claws had raked through them. The road started to curve, and that's when I saw it again, this time standing just off the shoulder. It wasn't fully in my headlights, but I could make out enough to know it wasn't any kind of animal I'd ever seen. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and hunched over like its spine couldn't support its weight. Its arms were way too long, almost dragging on the ground, and there was something shiny glinting off its back, like jagged pieces of metal or bone sticking out of its skin. I froze, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. And then it turned its head. Its face, or what should have been a face, was just this mess of distorted features. Eyes that glowed faintly red, a mouth that didn't look like it belonged on anything living. And it was smiling. Not like a human smile, though. It was more like the way a predator bares its teeth right before it goes for the kill. I slammed on the gas. I don't know how long I drove. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the car steady. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting that thing to be running after me, but the road behind me stayed empty. Finally, I saw a clearing up ahead, a small dirt lot with an old, rusted sign that said something about a scenic overlook. I pulled over, needing a second to catch my breath. The lot was empty except for a single picnic table and a wooden fence overlooking the forest below. The air was cold, but it wasn't the kind of cold that made you shiver. It was the kind that made your skin crawl, like you weren't supposed to be there. I stepped out of the car, camera in hand. I know, stupid move, but my curiosity was winning over my fear. I figured if I could just snap a picture, maybe I'd prove to myself that this was all in my head. I walked to the edge of the overlook, aiming my camera at the trees below. At first, all I saw was darkness. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I noticed movement, something big, weaving between the trees. It wasn't running, it was stalking. My breath caught as I zoomed in. Through the viewfinder, I could just make out its shape, its unnatural gait, and then it stopped. It turned its head upward. It was looking directly at me. That's when I heard the first scream. It came from somewhere deep in the forest. A high-pitched, blood-curdling scream that didn't sound human. My first instinct was to run back to the car, but my legs felt like they were stuck in concrete. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something moving closer. It wasn't W13. It was smaller, human-shaped, but there was something off about it. The way it moved, jerky, almost robotic, made my stomach churn. And that's when I realized it wasn't moving toward me. It was being dragged. I scrambled back to the car, fumbling with the keys, when I saw another shape emerge from the forest. This one wasn't human. It wasn't even close. It was crawling on all fours, its limbs bending in impossible directions. Its skin, or whatever it had instead of skin, looked like it was rotting, peeling away to reveal bone and muscle. And its eyes, they weren't glowing anymore. They were dead, black pits that seemed to suck in all the light around them. It didn't make a sound. It just stared at me, its head tilted like it was studying me, and then it smiled. I don't remember much after that. I must have gotten back into the car and driven away, but it's all a blur. The next thing I remember is waking up in my driveway, my car covered in mud and branches, my camera gone. When I checked my phone, there was one new video saved in my gallery. It was a 10-second clip of me standing at the overlook, staring into the forest. In the background, just behind me, a pair of glowing red eyes blinked once before the screen went black. The first thing I did when I woke up in my driveway was check all the doors. House, car, everything. Locked. Then I grabbed a knife from the kitchen. I don't even know why. I just felt like I needed something, anything, to feel less vulnerable. But even with the knife in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something back with me. The memory of those red eyes was burned into my brain. I couldn't stop replaying that smile in my head, the way it seemed almost gleeful, like it wanted me to see it. And then there was the video. I must have watched it a dozen times, frame by frame, trying to make sense of it. I don't remember recording anything at the overlook, and yet there it was, 10 seconds of me standing frozen, staring into the void, while something lurked just feet behind me. The glowing red eyes were unmistakable, but what really made my skin crawl was the sound. At first, I didn't notice it. The clip seemed silent, just the faint rustle of wind in the background. But when I turned the volume all the way up, I heard something else. A low, distorted voice, almost like a growl, whispering two words over and over. "Come back." I deleted the video immediately. Not that it mattered. The damage was already done. Over the next few days, things got worse. It started small. At night, I'd hear noises outside my window, branches snapping, faint scratching sounds, the occasional thud like something heavy had hit the ground. I tried telling myself it was just animals, but deep down, I knew better. Then, one morning, I found muddy footprints on my porch. Not shoe prints, bare feet. and they weren't human. The toes were too long, and the spacing between each step was too far apart, like whatever made them was much bigger than me. I called the cops, feeling ridiculous even as I dialed. What was I supposed to say? Hi, I think a Soviet super soldier experiment is stalking me. Instead, I told them someone had been trespassing and asked them to send someone to check it out. The officer who showed up was nice enough, but I could tell he didn't take me seriously. He walked around the yard, glanced at the footprints, and shrugged. Probably a bear, he said, even though the prints clearly didn't have claws. Or a prank. Kids like to mess with people around here. I nodded, pretending to agree, but I knew he was wrong. The next night, it got worse. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a loud bang. It sounded like something had slammed against the side of the house. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to get up and look out the window. At first, I didn't see anything, just my yard, bathed in the pale yellow glow of the porch light. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, something darting across the far edge of the property. It was fast, almost a blur, but I could tell it wasn't human. I grabbed the knife from under my pillow. Yes, I was sleeping with it at this point, and crept downstairs. The house was dead silent, except for the faint creak of the floorboards under my feet. I checked the locks on the doors and windows again, double and triple checking. Everything was secure. And then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. Someone had tagged me in a story. I frowned, confused. I hadn't posted anything in days, and most of my friends were the kind of people who only posted food pics or gym selfies. But when I opened the app, my stomach dropped. The story was a video, grainy black and white footage of my house. It was taken from the edge of the woods, the camera slowly zooming in on my bedroom window. The caption read, "Still watching." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed up with every light in the house on, clutching the knife and refreshing Instagram every 5 minutes. The story had vanished within an hour, but the damage was done. Whoever, or whatever, was doing this wasn't just toying with me. They wanted me to know they were there. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I packed a bag, grabbed my laptop, and drove to a cheap motel about an hour away. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, and I made sure to park my car out of view from the road. The motel was questionable, to say the least. The carpet smelled like mildew, and the walls were so thin I could hear the couple next door arguing about pizza toppings, but I didn't care. As long as I was out of the house, I felt safer. For a little while, anyway. That night, I tried to go through the dark web file again, hoping I'd miss something that could explain what was happening. Most of it was the same. Photos of W13, medical reports, interviews. But there was one document I hadn't looked at closely before. It was a handwritten note, scanned and poorly translated from Russian. The handwriting was shaky, like the person writing it was either terrified or in pain. It said, "The failures don't die. They adapt, they learn, they follow, and they never forget the ones who find them." Underneath the note was a series of coordinates. I copied them into Google Maps, half expecting them to lead to some remote Siberian tundra. Instead, they pointed to a location just 2 towns away from the motel. I didn't want to go. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to stay put, to delete the file, and to pretend none of this ever happened. But I couldn't. If I didn't find out the truth, I'd never sleep again. The location was an abandoned industrial park, the kind of place that looks like it belongs in a post-apocalyptic movie. Rusted fences, shattered windows, graffiti everywhere. As I stepped out of the car, I could feel the cold creeping in, biting at my skin, even though it wasn't that cold outside. The silence was the worst part. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just this heavy, suffocating stillness. I found a way inside through a broken side door. The air inside was thick with the smell of mold and rust. My footsteps echoed as I walked through the empty hallways, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. And then I saw it. In the middle of the main room was a metal chair bolted to the floor. Thick leather straps hung from the arms and legs, and the floor around it was stained dark with something I didn't want to identify. On the wall behind the chair was a message, scrawled in what looked like dried blood. "It sees you." Before I could process what I was looking at, I heard the sound of footsteps. They weren't human. The rhythm was off. Too fast, too heavy, and they were getting closer. I turned off my flashlight and ducked behind a pile of rusted machinery, trying to steady my breathing. The footsteps stopped just a few feet away. I peeked out, and there it was. W13. It was even worse up close. Its body was a patchwork of scars and exposed muscle, like it had been stitched together from different creatures. Those jagged protrusions on its back weren't bone. They were shards of metal, glinting faintly in the dim light. And its eyes, they weren't glowing anymore. They were empty sockets, black holes that seemed to pull everything into them. It sniffed the air, its head twitching like a predator locking onto its prey. And then it smiled. I've never felt terror like that before. My whole body locked up, like my instincts couldn't decide between running or just curling into a ball and hoping it didn't see me. W13 wasn't just standing there. It was savoring the moment. The way it tilted its head, the way its grin stretched too wide, showing teeth that didn't look human. It was playing with me. Then it moved. Not toward me, but in this slow, deliberate circle around the room, its head constantly swiveling, like it was scanning for something. Every movement was unnatural, jerky, but somehow precise, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. I tried to stay perfectly still behind the machinery, but the room was so quiet that I swore it could hear my heartbeat. I could feel sweat dripping down my neck, my breath catching in my throat. Then, out of nowhere, it stopped. It sniffed the air again, its chest expanding and contracting like some grotesque animal. Slowly, its head turned in my direction. I don't know if it actually saw me or if it just sensed me somehow, but it took a single, deliberate step toward my hiding spot. That's when the sound started. It was this low, guttural growl, like it was coming from deep inside its chest. But then the growl shifted, almost like laughter. It wasn't loud. It was barely more than a rasp, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. It was laughing at me. I couldn't stay there. I knew that much. If I waited any longer, it would find me. My knife felt useless in my hand. I might as well have been holding a butter knife against a tiger, but I gripped it anyway, trying to keep my hands from shaking. The machinery I was hiding behind was old, rusted, and covered in grease. Slowly, I reached out and grabbed a loose pipe that was leaning against the side. If nothing else, I figured it might buy me a few seconds. Then with my free hand, I picked up a loose bolt from the ground and chucked it across the room. The noise echoed, bouncing off the walls, and for a second, W13 froze. Then, just as I'd hoped, it turned its head toward the sound and bolted. I didn't wait to see where it went. I shot out from behind the machinery and sprinted toward the door I'd come in through. My flashlight stayed off. I didn't want to give away my position, but the darkness made it almost impossible to navigate. My boots thudded against the floor, the sound deafening in the silence. I made it halfway to the door when I heard it. The footsteps were back, faster this time. They weren't human. They were erratic, almost like something running on all fours, and they were getting louder. I rounded a corner and slammed into a metal cabinet, nearly dropping the knife and pipe. My head was spinning, but I forced myself to keep moving. I could hear it closing in behind me, the sound of metal scraping against concrete. I reached the door and yanked on the handle. Locked. No, 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 I muttered under my breath, panic setting in. I turned around just in time to see W13 emerge from the shadows, its massive frame barely visible in the dim light. Its head was tilted to the side, and I could see those black, empty sockets where its eyes should have been. It was watching me, even though it shouldn't have been able to. And then it did something I wasn't expecting. It stood up straight, towering over me, and raised one of its arms. Its hand, or whatever you'd call the mangled thing at the end of its arm, was stretched out, like it was offering me something. I couldn't see what it was at first, but as it stepped closer, I realized it was holding a piece of paper. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the paper, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Finally, I forced myself to take a step back. That's when it spoke. "Take it," it rasped. Its voice wasn't natural. It was low, guttural, and distorted, like it was coming through a broken speaker. I don't know what terrified me more, the fact that it could talk, or the fact that it knew English. I didn't take the paper. Instead, I swung the pipe as hard as I could. It hit W13 square in the chest, but the impact barely fazed it. The thing didn't even flinch. Instead, it dropped the paper and lunged at me, its movements faster than anything I'd ever seen. I barely managed to dodge out of the way, stumbling into another hallway. The paper was still lying on the floor behind me, but there was no way I was going back for it. The next few minutes were a blur. I ran blindly through the maze of hallways, the sound of W13's footsteps echoing all around me. At one point, I thought I'd lost it, but then I heard that raspy laughter again, closer this time. I found another door, this one slightly ajar, and ducked inside. The room was small and cluttered with old equipment, desks, filing cabinets, broken monitors. I squeezed behind a large cabinet, crouching as low as I could, and tried to quiet my breathing. The door creaked open, and W13 stepped inside. I could see its shadow on the wall, long and distorted in the faint light. It moved slowly, its head turning side to side as it scanned the room. "Come back," it whispered, its voice echoing in the small space. I gripped the knife tighter, praying it wouldn't find me. The shadow stopped moving. Then, without warning, it lunged toward the cabinet I was hiding behind. I didn't have time to think. I swung the knife as hard as I could, aiming for anything I could reach. The blade sank into something, and W13 let out a guttural roar that shook the walls. Its arm shot out, grabbing me by the collar and lifting me off the ground like I weighed nothing. Up close, I could see every horrifying detail. Its patchwork skin, the jagged metal protrusions, the black, empty voids where its eyes should have been. It slammed me against the wall, knocking the wind out of me. My vision blurred, but I managed to keep hold of the knife. And then, in a moment of pure desperation, I did something I didn't even think about. I shoved the knife into one of its eye sockets. The thing let out a scream, a real blood-curdling scream that echoed through the entire building. It dropped me, clutching at its face, and stumbled back. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I bolted for the door, my entire body screaming in pain. When I finally made it back to my car, I didn't even stop to catch my breath. I threw myself into the driver's seat, started the engine, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. In the rearview mirror, I thought I saw movement, something darting out of the building and into the woods, but I didn't stick around to find out. By the time I made it back to the motel, I was shaking so hard I could barely get the key into the door. Inside, I collapsed onto the bed, my mind racing. I still had no idea what W13 wanted, why it was toying with me, or what was on that piece of paper. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. The motel room felt like it was shrinking around me, every shadow on the wall twisting into something worse in my head. My phone was dead. I'd forgotten to charge it, and I didn't dare turn on the TV or any lights. I just sat there on the bed, knife clutched in my hand, staring at the door like I expected W13 to come barreling through it at any moment. But it didn't. The night dragged on like it was stuck on repeat, every second stretching into minutes. When the sun finally rose, it didn't bring relief, just this cold, hollow feeling in my chest, like I'd only survived by accident. That's when I realized I had no plan. Running clearly wasn't working. If W13 wanted me, it would find me. I could feel it in my bones. But there was one thing I couldn't stop thinking about. The paper. What was so important about it? Why had W13 tried to give it to me? Whatever was written on it, I was starting to think it wasn't just some random scare tactic. There was something I was missing. Some piece of the puzzle I hadn't put together yet. I knew I had to go back. By the time I returned to the industrial park, the sun was high in the sky, but the place still looked like a nightmare. It was like the light didn't even reach the building. The shadows were too deep, the air too still. My hands were shaking as I got out of the car. I told myself I'd be in and out, that I wouldn't stay long enough for anything to happen. I just needed to grab the paper and go. The door I'd used the night before was still slightly open, creaking faintly in the breeze. I hesitated for a long moment before stepping inside, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn around and leave. The interior was just as I'd left it, dark, cold, and silent. I retraced my steps as best as I could, trying to remember where I'd seen the paper. It was hard to focus. Every sound, every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made my heart jump. Then I found it. The paper was lying on the floor in the same spot W13 had dropped it, slightly crumpled but otherwise intact. I crouched down and picked it up, my hands trembling. The writing was in Russian, just like the documents in the dark web file. Thankfully, there was an English translation scribbled in the margins, though the handwriting was barely legible. The note read, "They lied to us. The experiments never failed. They succeeded beyond their expectations. The subjects weren't designed to fight wars. They were designed to survive anything. They adapt. They evolve. They don't need food. They don't need rest. And they don't die. W13 isn't just one of them. It's the first, the prototype, the one they perfected. And now it's loose. If you've seen it, it's already too late. It will follow you until it finishes what it started. The only way to stop it is to The rest of the note was smeared with something dark and dried, like blood. A loud crash echoed through the building, shattering the silence. I shut up, clutching the note, and spun around. My heart was hammering so hard, I thought it might burst. The sound had come from somewhere deeper in the building, but it was impossible to tell exactly where. I backed away, moving toward the door as quietly as I could. My knife was in my pocket this time. I'd grabbed something better, a crowbar I'd found outside. Not that I thought it would do much against W13, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. As I neared the exit, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. Movement. W13 was standing at the end of the hallway, perfectly still, its head tilted at that unnatural angle. Its body was even more horrifying in the daylight, every scar and jagged edge of metal catching the light in a way that made it look alive, like it was shifting and breathing. And its face, its smile was wider now, stretching its skin taut, almost like it was mocking me. "Come back," it rasped, the sound sending a chill down my spine. I didn't think. I just ran. I burst out of the building and sprinted toward my car, my legs burning with every step. The paper was clutched in one hand, the crowbar in the other, and my mind was racing. I didn't hear W13 chasing me, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. It was quiet when it wanted to be. That was the worst part. It didn't have to run me down. It could just wait. I threw myself into the car, slammed the door, and locked it. For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then I looked up. W13 was standing at the edge of the parking lot, just watching me. Its head tilted again, as if it was curious, and then it smiled wider. That's when I noticed the piece of metal in its hand. It took me a second to realize what it was. It was the hood ornament from my car. I slammed the car into reverse and peeled out of there, not caring where I was going, as long as it was away from that thing. My tires kicked up gravel, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw W13 start to move, but I didn't stick around to see how fast it could run. For hours, I just drove, taking random turns and back roads, trying to lose whatever invisible thread connected me to that thing. By the time I finally stopped, I was in the middle of nowhere, parked on the side of a road surrounded by endless fields. I pulled out the note again, rereading it, hoping I'd missed something, some kind of clue, some way to stop W13. But the smeared blood made it impossible to decipher the rest. The only thing I knew for sure was that it wouldn't stop. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I've tried everything to stay off the grid, changing motels every night, ditching my car for a rental, even leaving my phone off. But no matter where I go, I always feel like it's just behind me. The other night, I woke up to find a new note slipped under the door of my motel room. It wasn't handwritten this time. It was printed, typed out in plain, cold letters. "We told you not to look. Now it will never stop." I haven't seen W13 again yet, but I know it's only a matter of time. The last thing the note said keeps playing in my head, over and over. They were designed to adapt, to learn, to survive. You can't kill it, but it can kill you. I don't know how much longer I can keep running. If you've made it this far, I'm begging you, don't try to find the file. Don't go looking for W13. Whatever you do, stay away from Route 49, from the industrial park, from the coordinates in the file. Because if you see it, if it sees you, it's already too late. And when it finally catches up to me, I know one thing for sure. It won't be quick. I paid $300 for a dark web file about Disney Parks' closed attractions. One of the rides had a hidden room with cameras. So, yeah, I know how this sounds. You're probably already rolling your eyes like, oh, here we go, another dark web story. But listen, I swear on my life this really happened, and it's messed me up so bad that I haven't been able to sleep right since. I've always been a huge Disney fan, not in the I wear Mickey ears to the grocery store kind of way, but I grew up on Disney movies. My family even saved for years to go to Disney World when I was 8. I remember how magical it all felt back then, and I guess some part of me just never let that go. But as I got older, I started hearing all these rumors online, stuff about abandoned attractions, creepy urban legends, and weird things that Disney supposedly hides. I brushed it off as internet nonsense, but I was intrigued. I mean, how could I not be? Disney has this squeaky clean image, and the idea of something dark lurking underneath it was just, I don't know, fascinating. So one night, after binge watching a bunch of creepy Disney theories videos on YouTube, I did something really, really stupid. I went digging on the deep web. It started off innocent enough. I downloaded Tor, the browser you need to access the deep web, and poked around out of curiosity. Most of it was just boring, cryptic-looking forums and sketchy marketplaces selling things like fake IDs and counterfeit money. I was about to log off when I saw a listing that caught my eye. Disney Parks, classified files, $300. The description wasn't long. It just said, exclusive files on Disney's abandoned and closed attractions, includes blueprints, surveillance logs, and internal memos, contains info Disney doesn't want you to know. I knew it was probably a scam, but the idea of seeing behind the curtain was too tempting. My curiosity completely overrode my common sense. I didn't think about the consequences or who might have posted it. I was just like, I need to see this. So, I bought it. I used Bitcoin, because apparently that's how you do these things. And about an hour later, I got an email with a download link. It was a single zip file, about 4 gigabytes in size. My hands were shaking as I clicked on it. At first, it looked like a random jumble of stuff. There were blueprints of rides, lists of cast member names, weird internal memos about security protocols. Most of it was boring, like spreadsheets and old scanned documents. But then, I found a folder labeled surveillance logs, and things started to get weird. The folder contained dozens of video files, all named after different Disney attractions. There was one for Space Mountain, another for It's a Small World, even one for freaking Goofy's Barnstormer. At first, I figured they were just old security cam footage, maybe used for training or something. But as I clicked on a file labeled Pirates 11-3-2016, I realized this was way worse than I thought. The video was from a camera inside the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. You know how the boats go through that foggy pot with the skeletons? It started there. The footage was grainy and black and white, like it was taken with a hidden camera. At first, it was just normal stuff. Guests riding the boats, kids laughing, that kind of thing. But then I noticed something off. There was this man sitting in the back of one of the boats. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face, and he didn't seem to be with anyone. While everyone else was looking around and reacting to the ride, he was just staring at the camera. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but as I skipped through the video, the same man kept showing up, boat after boat. He was always sitting in the back row, staring straight at the camera, like he knew it was there. And then it got worse. At about the 6-minute mark, the ride broke down. You know how they sometimes stop the boats and play that announcement? Please remain seated while we resolve the issue, or whatever. Well, that happened. But instead of just sitting there, like everyone else, the man stood up. I swear to God, he stood up, climbed out of the boat, and walked off the track. The camera didn't follow him, but I could see his shadow disappearing behind one of the animatronic skeletons. And that's when the footage cut out. I sat there staring at my screen, heart pounding. I couldn't explain it, but something about the whole thing made my skin crawl. I started going through more of the files, and it only got creepier. There were videos from other rides, Haunted Mansion, Splash Mountain, even the freaking teacups, and in almost every one, that same man appeared. Sometimes he'd just be sitting there, watching. Other times, he'd get up and walk into areas guests aren't supposed to go. But the worst video, the one that still haunts me, was from a ride that doesn't even exist anymore. The file was labeled Mr. Toad's Wild Ride Camera 01. If you're not familiar, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride was this old attraction that closed down in the late 90s. I only vaguely remembered it from my childhood, but apparently they replaced it with a Winnie the Pooh ride years ago. The video started like all the others. It was grainy footage from inside the ride, showing guests in those little car-shaped vehicles. Everything seemed normal at first, but then, about 3 minutes in, I noticed something chilling. One of the cars didn't have guests in it. It had mannequins. They weren't Disney characters or anything. They were just these blank, featureless human figures, slumped over like broken dolls. And behind them, in the shadows, I could see the man from the other videos. He wasn't sitting in a car this time. He was just standing there, staring at the mannequins, and then he turned to the camera. His face was still mostly hidden under the baseball cap, but for a split second, the light hit him just right, and I swear I saw his mouth moving, like he was saying something. The footage cut out after that, and I just sat there, frozen. I didn't know what to think. Was this some kind of sick joke? A hoax? I wanted to stop watching, but something kept pulling me back in. I had to know more. So, I went back to the files, and that's when I found the hidden room. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared, although I was, but because I couldn't stop going through the files. I felt like I was falling down some twisted rabbit hole, and the deeper I went, the more I realized I wasn't supposed to be seeing any of this. After finding the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride Camera 01 file, I started noticing something I hadn't before. Tiny inconsistencies. Each ride's footage had these little glitches, almost like static flickers, at specific timestamps. At first, I thought it was just the files being corrupted, but then I realized the timestamps matched up across multiple videos. The static wasn't random, it was a pattern. I went back to the Pirates video, the one where the guy climbed out of the boat, and found the exact moment the footage cut out. The timestamp was 2:14:36. Then I checked the Haunted Mansion video. Same time. Splash Mountain. Same. It was like something was being intentionally cut from the recordings. Something Disney didn't want anyone to see. But I guess whoever compiled these files made a mistake, because buried in one of the folders was a file named Archive Logs. It wasn't a video, it was a text document, and it was full of timestamps. Next to each one was a ride name and a description of something called B subsection access. I had no idea what that meant, But there was one line that made my stomach drop. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride 02-14-36. Camera 07. Active. B subsection room secured. I didn't remember seeing anything about a camera 07 in the Mr. Toad's footage. I opened the file again, skipping to the timestamp. That's when I noticed something strange. When the man moved out of frame, the camera stayed still for a few seconds, but then it glitched. Just for a second, the angle shifted, like the camera had been switched. The new shot wasn't of the ride. It was a dark hallway. The hallway didn't look like anything Disney would have in one of their attractions. It wasn't themed, colorful, or whimsical. It was cold, industrial, like something out of a maintenance tunnel. At first, there was nothing in the frame but a flickering fluorescent light overhead. Then, from the shadows, the man stepped into view. He was dragging something. It was hard to tell what at first, but as he moved closer to the camera, I realized it was a large black bag, and whatever was inside, it was heavy. He was struggling to pull it. I should have stopped watching. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to close the file and delete everything, but I couldn't look away. My curiosity had turned into morbid obsession. The man dragged the bag down the hallway until he reached a door. It had no sign, no markings, just a keypad. He punched in a code, and the door clicked open. As he stepped inside, the footage ended. I couldn't stop thinking about the black bag. What was in it? Why was this footage even being recorded in the first place? I started digging deeper into the folder, searching for any mention of this B subsection. Eventually, I found another blueprint, this one labeled Project Croatoan, 1976. The blueprint showed the layout of an old ride I didn't recognize, something called Discovery Caverns. Apparently, it was built in the 70s, but closed before it even opened to the public. The ride was supposed to be a cave exploration thing, with animatronic miners and glowing crystals. But here's the thing. The blueprint showed a hidden section underneath the ride, a series of tunnels and rooms labeled with strange codes like E-5 and T-3. One room caught my attention. It was labeled Surveillance Storage and had a handwritten note scrawled next to it. Do not document. Restricted access. My heart was pounding as I read that. Surveillance storage? Was that where the footage was being recorded? And why the hell wasn't it supposed to be documented? I went back to the surveillance folder, scrolling through the list of files until I found one labeled Discovery Caverns Test Footage. This video was different from the others. It didn't start with guests or animatronics. It started in one of those hidden rooms from the blueprint. The camera was stationary, pointed at a steel table in the middle of the room. There were strange stains on the floor, dark, sticky smears that I didn't want to think too much about. On the table were several small objects, a pair of gloves, a scalpel, and what looked like a notebook. And then, I saw him. The man from the other videos walked into frame, but this time, he wasn't wearing a baseball cap. His face was wrong. His skin looked pale and waxy, almost fake, like it had been stretched too tightly over his skull. His eyes were sunken, and his lips were cracked and dry, like he hadn't had water in days. He picked up the notebook and started flipping through it. The camera didn't have audio, but I could see his lips moving, like he was talking to himself. Occasionally, he'd stop and write something down. Then, out of nowhere, he snapped his head toward the camera. He stared directly into the lens, his lips curling into this slow, unnatural smile. And that's when I saw it. the wall behind him. There were cameras everywhere, dozens of them, mounted on racks, pointed at the table like they were recording something. Each one had a small tag hanging from it, with names written in blocky letters: Space Mountain, Big Thunder Mountain, Pirates of the Caribbean, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. I froze. These weren't security cameras. They were the cameras from the ride footage. I didn't watch the rest of the video. I couldn't. At that point, I was beyond freaked out. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely move my mouse. I didn't want to know what else was on that table or what the man was doing in that room. But part of me, some stupid, reckless part of me, still wanted answers. I went back to the folder, scrolling through the remaining files, and that's when I saw it. A file labeled Hidden Room Audio.mp3. I hesitated for a long time before clicking on it. When I finally pressed play, I instantly regretted it. The recording started with static, like an old radio tuning in. Then I heard a voice, raspy, low, and barely audible. They always come back, always watching. There was a pause, and then a loud thud, like something heavy being dropped. I almost turned it off, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a scream. Not just any scream. This was guttural, raw, the kind of sound someone makes when they're truly terrified. It cut off abruptly, followed by the sound of metal scraping against metal. Then, the man's voice again, whispering, "Room for one more." The recording ended. I slammed my laptop shut and sat there in silence, my heart racing. I didn't know what I'd just uncovered, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't some urban legend. This was real, and I wasn't supposed to know about it. I didn't touch my laptop for 3 days after hearing that recording. Every time I walked past it, I felt like it was staring back at me, daring me to open those files again. But the thing is, once you know something like this exists, it lives in your head. It festers. You try to ignore it, but it pulls you back, whispering to you in the quiet moments, asking questions you can't answer. By the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know more. I had to understand what this B subsection was, who that man was, and what the hell Disney was hiding in those surveillance rooms. So, like an idiot, I opened the files again. This time, I wasn't just skimming through random videos. I was on a mission. I started cross-referencing the timestamps, blueprints, and surveillance footage, trying to piece together a bigger picture. And I wish to God I hadn't, because the picture I uncovered was so much worse than I ever imagined. The breakthrough came when I found a second text document buried in the archive folder. This one was different from the others. It wasn't just a log or a list of timestamps. It was a report. The file was called Incident 44 Internal Review and had a date, April 22nd, 1994. At first, the report was a confusing mix of bureaucratic jargon and redacted text. Phrases like unauthorized access, asset security breach, and protocol deviation kept popping up, but it wasn't until I got to the last paragraph that everything clicked into place. Following the Incident 44 breach, all B subsection access points within Discovery Caverns, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and Space Mountain have been permanently sealed. All surveillance equipment has been relocated to Sublevel 3 of the Project Croatoan facility, with restricted access granted to the Behavioral Analysis Team only. Note: Cast member number 004-11, contractor, remains unaccounted for. Presumed terminated. Awaiting further instruction from Central. I read that last line about 10 times, trying to make sense of it. Presumed terminated? Were they saying the man in the videos was a cast member? And what the hell was a behavioral analysis team? I scrolled down, hoping for more answers, and that's when I saw the attachment. It was another video file, this one labeled Incident 44 Footage. My stomach dropped. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew I wasn't ready to see whatever it showed. But of course, I clicked on it anyway. The video started in a break room. You could tell by the cheap, mismatched furniture and the faint hum of a vending machine off screen. There were 3 people in the room, 2 men and a woman, all wearing cast member uniforms. They looked like they'd just come off a shift, laughing and talking about something I couldn't hear. The camera was positioned in the corner, angled slightly down, like it was hidden in a vent. For a moment, it felt almost normal, just co-workers winding down after a long day. But then the door opened, and everything changed. The man from the other videos walked in. His uniform was the same as theirs, but there was something off about the way he moved. His posture was stiff, and his head hung slightly to the side, like his neck couldn't quite support the weight of it. He didn't say anything. He just stood there in the doorway, staring at them. One of the men noticed him first. "Hey, you good?" he asked, his voice faintly picked up by the camera's mic. The man didn't respond. He just kept staring, his lips curling into that same unnatural smile I'd seen before. The second man stood up. "Yo, what's your problem?" he said, stepping closer. "You lost or something?" And then, without warning, the man lunged at him. The attack was fast, brutal, and completely silent. The man grabbed the second guy by the throat and slammed him against the wall so hard the camera shook. The woman screamed, scrambling to her feet, but the man didn't even look at her. His focus was entirely on the guy he was choking, his face inches away from his victims, that smile never wavering. The first man tried to intervene, grabbing a chair and swinging it at the attacker, but it didn't do anything. The man didn't flinch, didn't even react. He just tightened his grip until there was a sickening crack, and the second guy went limp. The woman bolted for the door, but before she could make it, the man turned and grabbed her by the hair. She screamed, clawing at his hands, but it was like he didn't feel it. He dragged her back into the room and threw her onto the table. And then he started humming. I froze. My blood turned to ice as I recognized the tune. It was When You Wish Upon a Star. The video cut out after that. No fade to black, no static, just an abrupt stop, like someone had ripped the plug out of the wall. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing. That couldn't be real. There was no way that was real. But the thing is, it felt real. Too real. I went back to the report, scanning it for any mention of the people in the video. I found a brief note buried in the appendix. Casualties: 2. Employee termination handled on-site. No external documentation required. Cleanup completed by Central Team B. No further action necessary. Cleanup? That's how they described it? Like it was a spilled drink or a maintenance issue. I felt sick. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, his twisted smile, the way he moved like he wasn't entirely human, and the humming, that goddamn humming, kept playing on a loop in my head. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was done. I didn't care about answers anymore. I didn't care about conspiracies or hidden rooms or whatever the hell Project Croatoan was. I just wanted to forget this ever happened. So I grabbed my laptop, deleted the files, and disconnected the hard drive I'd saved them on. Then I drove to the nearest park and threw the damn thing in a lake. But here's the thing about curiosity. Once it's been awakened, it doesn't go away that easily. 2 weeks later, I got an email. The subject line was blank, and the sender was just a string of random letters and numbers. I almost deleted it without opening it, but something made me stop. When I clicked on it, there was no text in the body, just a single attachment. Surveillance log, December 4th, 2023, .mp4. My heart sank. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I couldn't stop myself. I clicked on the file, and the video started playing. It was footage of my apartment. The camera was positioned in the corner of the living room, angled down at my couch. The lighting was dim, but I could clearly see myself sitting there, staring at my laptop. The timestamp on the footage was from 2 nights ago. As the video played, I saw myself stand up and walk toward the kitchen. The room was empty for a few seconds, and then he walked into frame. The man. He stood there, staring directly at the camera, his smile wider than ever. And then, in a low, raspy voice, he whispered, "Room for one more." I shut my laptop and threw it across the room. When I looked back, the screen was cracked, but the video was still playing. The man was still smiling. And then, the power went out. When the power went out, the apartment fell into a silence so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat. My first instinct was to grab my phone, but of course, it was dead, because why wouldn't it be? I was left in the dark, my cracked laptop lying on the floor across the room, still playing that cursed video. And that's when I heard it, a faint humming. At first, I thought it was just my ears playing tricks on me, the memory of that horrific video still lingering in my head. But no, it was real. Soft, low, and slow. The unmistakable tune of "When You Wish Upon a Star" drifted through the darkness. The sound wasn't coming from the laptop. It was coming from the hallway. I don't even remember grabbing the baseball bat I keep under my bed. I just know I had it in my hands when I stepped into the hallway. The humming was louder now, echoing faintly off the walls. The hallway was empty, but the air felt wrong, heavy, like someone or something was watching me. I walked toward the source of the sound, my footsteps slow and deliberate. The humming seemed to be coming from behind my front door. For a second, I thought about opening it. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping it was just some idiot pulling a prank, or maybe I just wanted confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. But before I could turn the handle, something stopped me, dead in my tracks. A shadow moved under the door. Not a person-shaped shadow. This was too tall, too distorted, like something stretched and broken, trying to mimic a human shape. It stopped directly in front of the door, the humming growing louder, more deliberate. And then, it knocked. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but eventually, the knocking stopped. The shadow moved away from the door, and the humming faded into the distance. I should have felt relieved, but something about the silence made me even more uneasy. It wasn't a normal silence. It was the kind that buzzes in your ears, like the world is holding its breath. I backed away from the door, clutching the bat so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I turned to go back to my room, I stopped. The laptop. It was still lying on the floor, the cracked screen flickering faintly. I didn't want to look at it, but something drew me closer. The video had changed. The footage on the screen was no longer of my apartment. It was a dark room, lit only by the flickering light of a single overhead bulb. The walls were bare, concrete, and stained with what looked like I don't even want to say it. In the center of the room was a table, and on that table was me. I was lying on my back, motionless, my face pale and lifeless. My arms and legs were strapped down with thick leather restraints, and my eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Above me, the man loomed, his twisted smile somehow wider than before. He held something in his hand, a scalpel, glinting faintly in the dim light. And then, slowly, he turned to face the camera. "I told you," he whispered, his voice crackling through the laptop's damaged speakers. "Room for one more." I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Was it some kind of sick threat, a hallucination? Or was it something worse? I couldn't stay in the apartment, not after that. I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and bolted out the door. But as I stepped into the hallway, I froze. Every door was open, not just unlocked, wide open, swinging slightly on their hinges as if someone had gone through and kicked them all in. I peeked inside one of the units, my heart pounding in my chest. It was empty, not just of people. Everything was gone. Furniture, clothes, even the light fixtures. The walls were bare, the floor coated in a thin layer of dust, like no one had lived there in years. But that wasn't possible. I'd seen my neighbors just that morning, an older woman who always walked her dog at sunrise, a college kid who played his music too loud, a couple with a crying baby. Where the hell had they all gone? As I backed away from the empty apartment, I noticed something on the floor near my feet, a trail of black scuff marks leading down the hallway. I followed the marks, even though every rational part of me was screaming not to. They led to the elevator at the end of the hall. The doors were slightly ajar, a faint, flickering light spilling out from inside. I don't know what I was expecting to find, but it sure as hell wasn't this. The elevator wasn't an elevator anymore. The walls were gone, replaced by rough concrete, like some kind of industrial shaft. The floor was covered in dark stains, and in the center was a large metal hatch, partially open. The scuff marks led directly to it. I should have turned around. I should have left the building, called the cops, done anything except what I did next. But curiosity, fear, and some inexplicable pull drove me forward. I knelt down and peered into the hatch. The space below was pitch black, but as I stared into the void, I thought I saw something moving, just faintly, shadows shifting against shadows, too far away to make out clearly. And then I heard it, the humming. It was louder now, echoing up from the darkness like it was coming from deep underground. I wanted to pull away, to slam the hatch shut and run, but I couldn't move. A voice, soft, raspy, and familiar, floated up to meet me. "Come see the magic, kiddo." The voice was my dad's. My dad had been dead for 10 years. Before I could react, something shot out of the darkness. A hand, pale and skeletal, its fingers impossibly long. It grabbed my wrist with a grip, like ice, pulling me toward the hatch. I screamed, yanking back with everything I had, but it was no use. Whatever was down there was stronger, and it was dragging me in. As my head neared the opening, I caught a glimpse of what was waiting for me below. It wasn't just one man. There were dozens of them, their faces pale and waxy, their smiles stretched wide, their eyes dark and hollow. They were standing in a circle, humming softly, their voices blending into a chilling harmony. And in the center of the circle was the table, the same table from the videos. I don't remember how I escaped. All I know is that I woke up hours later, lying on the floor of my apartment, the hatch and the elevator gone. The hallway was normal again, the door shut, the scuff marks vanished. But the humming? It hasn't stopped. It's quieter now, faint, just barely audible when the world is silent. But it's there, always there. I haven't been back to Disney since. Not because I don't want to, because I'm afraid they're still watching. And this time, they won't need to ask for one more. The humming hasn't stopped. It's been weeks now, maybe longer. I've lost track of time because it's impossible to focus. It's not just in the silence anymore. It's everywhere. In the buzz of the refrigerator, the hum of my car engine, even in my own breathing when it's quiet enough. No matter where I go, it follows me. But the worst part, I'm starting to hear it in places it can't possibly be. I'll be scrolling through TikTok, watching some random video, and for a split second, I'll hear it faintly in the background. Or I'll be at the grocery store, standing in line, and the overhead speakers will crackle, just for a second, playing those same notes. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. I mean, wouldn't you? But then, a week ago, something happened that proved I'm not crazy. Or maybe it proved I'm completely insane. Either way, it changed everything. It was late, probably around 3 a.m. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep because of the faint hum that seemed to be coming from inside the walls. My apartment felt suffocating, like the air was too thick to breathe. That's when my phone buzzed. The notification came from an app I don't even remember downloading, something called Magic Plus. The icon was a small, golden Mickey Mouse head. My stomach dropped. I unlocked my phone, and the app opened automatically. The screen was pitch black for a few seconds, and then a single line of text appeared. Your reservation is confirmed. I stared at it, confused, until another line appeared. One ticket to B subsection, Discovery Caverns. Arrive promptly at 4 a.m. Magic awaits you. I felt sick. My first instinct was to delete the app, but when I tried, my phone froze. The screen went black, and the humming grew louder, filling the room. I threw the phone onto the bed and backed away, like it might explode. But the thing is, even though I was terrified, part of me wasn't surprised. It was like I'd been waiting for this. At exactly 3:45 a.m., I left my apartment. I don't remember making the decision to go. I just went. It was like I was on autopilot, my body moving on its own. My car was parked outside, and as I slid into the driver's seat, the humming seemed to grow louder, as if it was coming from the car itself. The directions appeared on my phone without me opening any apps. No GPS app, no notifications, just white text on a black screen, guiding me turn by turn. The route didn't make sense. It took me out of town, down empty highways and dark back roads. They led to the elevator at the end of the hall. The doors were slightly ajar, a faint, flickering light spilling out from inside. I don't know what I was expecting to find, but it sure as hell wasn't this. The elevator wasn't an elevator anymore. The walls were gone, replaced by rough concrete, like some kind of industrial shaft. The floor was covered in dark stains, and in the center was a large metal hatch, partially open. The scuff marks led directly to it. I should have turned around. I should have left the building, called the cops, done anything except what I did next. But curiosity, fear, and some inexplicable pull drove me forward. I knelt down and peered into the hatch. The space below was pitch black, but as I stared into the void, I thought I saw something moving, just faintly, shadows shifting against shadows, too far away to make out clearly. And then I heard it, the humming. It was louder now, echoing up from the darkness like it was coming from deep underground. I wanted to pull away, to slam the hatch shut and run, but I couldn't move. A voice, soft, raspy, and familiar, floated up to meet me. "Come see the magic, kiddo." The voice was my dad's. My dad had been dead for 10 years. Before I could react, something shot out of the darkness. A hand, pale and skeletal, its fingers impossibly long. It grabbed my wrist with a grip, like ice, pulling me toward the hatch. I screamed, yanking back with everything I had, but it was no use. Whatever was down there was stronger, and it was dragging me in. As my head neared the opening, I caught a glimpse of what was waiting for me below. It wasn't just one man. There were dozens of them, their faces pale and waxy, their smiles stretched wide, their eyes dark and hollow. They were standing in a circle, humming softly, their voices blending into a chilling harmony. And in the center of the circle was the table. The same table from the videos. I don't remember how I escaped. All I know is that I woke up hours later, lying on the floor of my apartment, the hatch and the elevator gone. The hallway was normal again, the door shut, the scuff marks vanished. But the humming, it hasn't stopped. It's quieter now, faint, just barely audible when the world is silent. But it's there, always there. I haven't been back to Disney since. Not because I don't want to, because I'm afraid they're still watching. And this time, they won't need to ask for one more. The humming hasn't stopped. It's been weeks now, maybe longer. I've lost track of time because it's impossible to focus. It's not just in the silence anymore. It's everywhere. In the buzz of the refrigerator, the hum of my car engine, even in my own breathing when it's quiet enough. No matter where I go, it follows me. But the worst part, I'm starting to hear it in places it can't possibly be. I'll be scrolling through TikTok, watching some random video, and for a split second, I'll hear it faintly in the background. Or I'll be at the grocery store, standing in line, and the overhead speakers will crackle, just for a second, playing those same notes. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. I mean, wouldn't you? But then, a week ago, something happened that proved I'm not crazy. Or maybe it proved I'm completely insane. Either way, it changed everything. It was late, probably around 3 a.m. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep because of the faint hum that seemed to be coming from inside the walls. My apartment felt suffocating, like the air was too thick to breathe. That's when my phone buzzed. The notification came from an app I don't even remember downloading, something called Magic Plus. The icon was a small, golden Mickey Mouse head. My stomach dropped. I unlocked my phone, and the app opened automatically. The screen was pitch black for a few seconds, and then a single line of text appeared. "Your reservation is confirmed." I stared at it, confused, until another line appeared. "One ticket to B subsection, Discovery Caverns. Arrive promptly at 4 a.m. Magic awaits you." I felt sick. My first instinct was to delete the app, but when I tried, my phone froze. The screen went black, and the humming grew louder, filling the room. I threw the phone onto the bed and backed away, like it might explode. But the thing is, even though I was terrified, part of me wasn't surprised. It was like I'd been waiting for this. At exactly 3:45 a.m., I left my apartment. I don't remember making the decision to go. I just went. It was like I was on autopilot, my body moving on its own. My car was parked outside, and as I slid into the driver's seat, the humming seemed to grow louder, as if it was coming from the car itself. The directions appeared on my phone without me opening any apps. No GPS app, no notifications, just white text on a black screen, guiding me turn by turn. The route didn't make sense. It took me out of town, down empty highways and dark back roads. I discovered a dark web page offering membership to the true elite. The application process required my DNA. Alright, so before I even start, I just want to say, I'm not some tech genius or hacker dude. I'm just a regular guy who spends way too much time on the internet. Like, if I'm not scrolling through Reddit or watching random conspiracy videos on YouTube, I'm probably half asleep on Discord with my friends. I'm just putting that out there because I have no idea how I ended up where I did. It started 2 weeks ago, right after midnight on a Friday. I was home alone, scrolling Reddit in the dark, with one AirPod in and some true crime podcast playing in the background. The vibe was chill until my internet started acting up. You know, pages weren't loading, random buffering. I figured it was just my cheap Wi-Fi, so I did the usual, restarted the router and refreshed everything. But then, this random link popped up on my screen. No, I'm not kidding. It literally just appeared out of nowhere, like it hijacked my browser or something. The URL was a mess of numbers and letters, like one of those Tor links people always warn you about in Don't Go Here threads. It was called trueeliteaccess.onion. At first, I thought it was just some troll ad, like one of those "Congratulations, you've won a free iPhone" scams. I almost closed it, but then curiosity kicked in. I mean, how often do you get handed a random deep web link like this? So yeah, I clicked it. Stupid, I know, but hindsight's 2020. The page that loaded was super minimalist. Black background, white text, nothing fancy. There was this big header at the top that said, "The True Elite, a place beyond power." Underneath, it just said, "Are you tired of being ordinary? The True Elite is a private community reserved for those who deserve to transcend mediocrity. Membership is granted only to those who pass the test." That's it. No flashy graphics, no videos, just text. It was kinda unsettling how plain it was. Like, whoever made it wasn't trying to grab attention. They were confident you'd already be hooked just by reading it. And honestly, they weren't wrong. I was hooked. It wasn't just the wording, it was the vibe. Like, who the hell are the true elite? Is it some secret society, a cult, an edgy Reddit knockoff? There was a single button at the bottom of the page that said, "Apply now." Against my better judgment, I clicked it. The next page asked for some pretty standard stuff at first. Name, age, country. But the questions got weird real fast. They asked things like, have you ever committed a crime that no one knows about? What would you sacrifice to obtain true power? If offered immortality, would you accept, knowing you'd need to abandon everyone you've ever loved? It didn't feel like one of those stupid BuzzFeed quizzes. These questions were personal, deep, and straight up unnerving. I didn't even know how to answer half of them. But here's where things got really messed up. After I finished the questionnaire, the page loaded a new section titled, "Final Step, Prove Your Worth." Below that was a single instruction, "Send us your DNA." I literally laughed out loud when I read that. Like, DNA. Are these guys serious? But they were. There was a whole set of instructions on how to send them a sample. They wanted me to spit into a vial, seal it up, and mail it to an address in Switzerland. Yes, Switzerland. I almost closed the page right there. It was obviously a scam, right? But something about it, I don't know how to explain it. It didn't feel like a scam. It felt real. And here's the part that still freaks me out. Right as I was about to exit the site, my phone buzzed. I looked down, and it was a text from an unknown number. It said, "You've been selected. Complete the process within 48 hours, or the opportunity will be forfeited." I swear to God, I never gave them my number. Hell, I didn't even give them my real name during the application. I stared at the message for a solid minute, trying to convince myself it was just some weird coincidence. But it wasn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing that page, the way it called itself a place beyond power, the way they somehow got my number, the fact that they wanted my DNA. By morning, my paranoia had turned into full-blown obsession. I started Googling everything I could about the true elite and deep web membership sites. Most of the results were garbage. People talking about Illuminati conspiracy theories and secret societies. But there were a few threads buried on Reddit that caught my attention. One guy claimed he'd found a similar site years ago, but backed out when they asked for a blood sample. Another person said they heard about someone who went through with it and vanished 2 months later. There were even a few comments from people warning against clicking the link at all, saying it wasn't just a scam, it was dangerous. But there was one comment that really stuck with me. It was on a super old post, buried so deep in the thread, I almost missed it. All it said was, "If you've been contacted, it's already too late." I probably should have stopped digging at that point, but I didn't. I couldn't. I barely slept the night after finding that site. My brain wouldn't shut up, running in circles about how they had my number. Every time I tried to convince myself it was just a prank or some elaborate phishing scam, I'd think about the phrasing of that text. "You've been selected." Selected for what? The next morning, I decided I'd been stupid and reckless, even clicking that link. I had a weird, gut-wrenching feeling that just looking at the site had crossed some line I shouldn't have. I resolved to let it go, forget about the whole thing, and move on. But of course, the universe had other plans. It was around noon when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the door through the peephole. Nobody there. Just a small plain cardboard box sitting on my doorstep. Now, this might sound ridiculous, but I froze. My neighborhood isn't exactly crime central, but there was something about that box that felt wrong, like it shouldn't be there. I cracked the door open, just enough to grab it, and brought it inside. There was no return address. The shipping label didn't even have my name on it, just my address, scrawled in shaky handwriting. My stomach twisted. The handwriting wasn't random. It looked like my own. I swear to you, I didn't write it. I should have just tossed the thing out. But, like an idiot, I grabbed a kitchen knife, sliced it open, and peeked inside. The box was filled with packing peanuts, which I had to dig through to find a small black velvet pouch. It felt heavy in my hand, like there was something solid inside. My hands were shaking as I loosened the drawstring and poured the contents onto the counter. It was a vial, a tiny glass vial, sealed tight, with some kind of dark red liquid inside. Blood. I gagged, nearly dropping it. My first thought was, whose blood is this? My second thought, scarier, was, is it mine? That didn't make sense though. I hadn't given them a sample, right? But as I stood there, staring at the vial, this icy thought crept into my brain. What if they already had it? Before I could even process that horrifying idea, I noticed something else in the box. Beneath the packing peanuts was a piece of paper, folded neatly into a square. I hesitated, but eventually unfolded it. The note read, "Congratulations on advancing to the next stage. Your sample has been verified. You are now eligible for Phase 2. There was a phone number at the bottom. No instructions, just the number, scrawled in that same handwriting that looked like mine, but wasn't. At this point, I knew I should have gone straight to the cops. But here's the thing. What would I even tell them? Hi, I think some weird secret society sent me blood in the mail. No, I don't know who they are. No, I don't have proof. But trust me, it's totally creepy. Yeah, right. Instead, I did the second stupidest thing I've ever done. I called the number. It rang 3 times before someone picked up. There was silence on the other end at first, just the faint sound of breathing. Then, a voice, a woman's voice, spoke. "You're late." My throat tightened. "What?" "You were supposed to call the moment you received the package," she said. Her tone was calm, but sharp, like she was scolding me. I don't even know what this is," I stammered. "Who are you? Why did you send me this?" She ignored my question. "You've been given an opportunity to prove yourself. Do not waste it." "Prove myself? For what?" There was a long pause. Then, in a voice so quiet I could barely hear her, she said, "For your place among the true elite." My blood ran cold. I don't remember much of the rest of the conversation because I was so freaked out. She gave me a date and time, midnight 2 nights from now, and an address downtown. She said I needed to show up if I wanted to continue. When I tried asking more questions, she hung up. I sat there for a while, staring at the vial of blood on my counter. My mind kept replaying what she'd said. "You've been given an opportunity." I didn't feel like I'd been given anything. I felt like I was being dragged into something dark and dangerous, something I didn't understand. For the next 2 days, I barely left my apartment. I kept thinking about what I'd read online, about people disappearing, about that comment that said, "It's already too late." Part of me wanted to ignore the address and pretend none of this was happening, but another part of me, the part that got me into this mess in the first place, had to know more. The address she gave me was for an abandoned office building in the worst part of town, the kind of place where people dump old mattresses and broken TVs. When I got there, the streets were empty. No cars, no people, just rows of dark, boarded up windows and cracked pavement. I checked my phone. It was 11:58 p.m. I should have turned around right then and there, but I didn't. The entrance was unlocked, and the inside of the building was pitch black. I used my phone flashlight to navigate, the light barely cutting through the darkness. The air smelled like mildew and something metallic, like rust. I wandered through empty hallways until I found a staircase leading down. My footsteps echoed as I descended, every creak of the stairs making my heart race. At the bottom, there was a heavy metal door with a keypad next to it. Before I could even think about turning back, the door clicked open on its own. The room beyond was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. The walls were painted this sickly shade of yellow, and the floor was covered in plastic sheets, like the kind you'd see in a murder scene on TV. There was a single chair in the center of the room, under a harsh, flickering light. And then I saw them. 3 people stood in the shadows, wearing featureless black masks. They didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, watching me. One of them stepped forward and placed something on the chair. It was a knife. A voice crackled over a hidden speaker. It was the same woman from the phone. "To prove your worth," she said, "you must show your loyalty. Spill blood, yours or someone else's. The choice is yours." The masked figures stepped closer, closing in. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized they weren't giving me a choice at all. I couldn't breathe. My whole body locked up as the 3 masked figures circled me, their black masks reflecting the harsh light above the chair. The knife on the seat gleamed, the edge so sharp it looked like it could split air. "Show your loyalty," the woman's voice repeated over the crackling speaker, calm but cold. "Spill blood, yours or someone else's." I wanted to run. My legs screamed at me to turn and bolt, but my feet felt cemented to the floor. These people, whatever they were, weren't going to let me just walk out of here. The room reeked of that metallic smell I'd noticed earlier. Now I knew what it was. Blood. My voice cracked as I stammered. I don't know what you want from me." The closest masked figure tilted their head, bird-like, and stepped forward. I staggered back, my heel catching the edge of the plastic sheet. For a split second, I thought they were going to grab me, but they didn't. Instead, they reached into their jacket and pulled something out. It was a photograph. They dropped it onto the chair, right next to the knife, and stepped back into the shadows. My hands were shaking so bad it took me 2 tries to pick it up. When I saw the picture, I felt my stomach drop out of my body. It was my sister, Emily. She was sitting at a table in some cafe I didn't recognize, staring at her phone. It wasn't an old photo either. She was wearing the jacket I'd bought her for her birthday last month. "You've been chosen," the woman's voice said again. "But to ascend, you must prove your devotion. 1 life binds you to us. A 2nd life earns your place among us." My blood turned to ice. No. Leave her out of this. She has nothing to do with this." The masked figure closest to me took another step forward. They raised their arm, and I flinched, expecting a punch or worse. But instead, they just pointed at the knife. I backed away, shaking my head. "I'm not doing this. I'm not hurting anyone." The woman on the speaker sighed, like a teacher disappointed in a failing student. "Your hesitation is understandable," she said. "But know this. If you refuse to participate, the choice will be made for you. You will not like the outcome." The speaker clicked off, plunging the room into an eerie silence. The masked figures didn't move. They just stood there, breathing heavily through their masks, waiting. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was seconds. It felt like forever. My mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this. There had to be another option, some loophole, but nothing made sense. These people had my DNA. They had my sister. They were watching me. They'd probably been watching me for longer than I realized. I stepped closer to the chair, my hands trembling as I stared at the knife. It wasn't some flimsy kitchen blade. This was a weapon, a long curved hunting knife with a leather-wrapped handle. It looked like it had seen some use. The masked figures didn't move, but I could feel their eyes on me, waiting, judging. I picked up the knife, the weight of it making my hand feel weak. My reflection stared back at me in the polished steel, pale and wide-eyed. My mind flashed to Emily, to her smile, her laugh, the way she'd always come to me for advice. She was only 23. She had her whole life ahead of her. If I didn't do this, they'd kill her. I knew it. Deep down, I knew it wasn't an empty threat. These people weren't bluffing. But if I did this, if I did what they wanted, what would that make me? That's when I noticed the door. It was barely visible in the dim light, set into the far wall, with no handle or keypad. Just a heavy, reinforced slab of metal with a tiny gap at the bottom. But it wasn't the door itself that caught my attention. It was the sound. Faint, muffled scratching. I froze, straining to hear over the pounding in my ears. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, like claws raking against metal. Then a low, guttural growl echoed from the other side. The masked figures didn't react. They just stood there, perfectly still, as if the sound wasn't there. What's in there? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. The growling deepened, turning into a wet, snarling sound, like an animal trying to chew its way through bone. The scratching turned into pounding, heavy thuds rattling the door in its frame. The plastic sheet on the floor rippled with every impact. I took a step back, clutching the knife so hard my knuckles turned white. What the hell is that? The speaker crackled to life again. The beast is hungry, the woman said. Her voice was calm, almost amused. But it will remain caged, as long as you make your choice. The pounding on the door grew more violent, the metal groaning under the strain. I could see the hinges trembling. Whatever was on the other side wasn't human. It couldn't be. I whipped around to face the masked figures. "You're insane," I shouted. "You can't expect me to." The door buckled, not open, but inward, like it was warping under the pressure. A rancid smell seeped into the room, a mix of rotting meat and sulfur that made my eyes water. The woman's voice grew stern. "Time is running out. Spill blood, or the beast will choose for you." The closest masked figure took another step forward, their silent presence suffocating. The pounding behind me grew deafening. I could feel the vibrations through the floor, through my legs, through my chest. In that moment, I snapped. I don't know if it was fear, adrenaline, or sheer panic, but something inside me broke. I spun around, slashing wildly with the knife. The blade caught one of the masked figures across the arm, slicing through their jacket. They stumbled back, clutching their wound, but the others didn't move. They just stood there, watching, silent. The speaker crackled again, and the woman laughed, a low, chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Ah, so you've made your choice," she said. "No, I didn't mean to." The pounding stopped. The room fell deathly silent, the only sound my ragged breathing. I turned back to the metal door, the air thick with tension, and then it opened. Not slowly, not cautiously, violently. The hinges exploded outward as the door was ripped from its frame, crashing to the floor with a metallic screech. What stepped out wasn't human. It stood at least 8 feet tall, hunched over to fit through the doorway. Its skin was slick and black, glistening like oil, with long, jagged limbs that ended in claws. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a featureless void, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to devour the light around it. And it was smiling, not with a mouth, but with its presence. I could feel it, a cold, mocking amusement that chilled me to the bone. The masked figures dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in unison. I didn't. I couldn't. The thing turned its attention to me, tilting its head like a predator studying its prey. My grip on the knife tightened as it stepped closer, its claws clicking against the plastic floor. "Your blood," the woman's voice whispered, almost tender. Or it's feast. I didn't have a choice anymore. I froze. It was like my brain short-circuited, refusing to accept what I was seeing. The thing, the beast, stood in front of me, its massive frame filling the room with a suffocating presence. I could feel its hunger, not just in the way it moved, but in the air itself. It pressed down on me like a living thing, clawing at my throat, my lungs. The plastic sheeting beneath its claws began to bubble, melting away as if it were corrosive. The masked figures remained kneeling, heads bowed, completely unbothered. The air reeked of burnt chemicals and rot, the smell so thick it made my eyes water. I clutched the knife, my knuckles white, but I might as well have been holding a toothpick. It wasn't just that the beast was terrifying to look at. It was the wrongness of it. Its movements, its presence, the way the shadows bent unnaturally around its body. It felt like I was staring at something that shouldn't exist. The speaker crackled again, and the woman's voice returned, soft and measured. Do you understand now? My mouth was dry. Understand? What? This is power, she said. This is what we offer you. Control over the unimaginable, but only if you prove yourself worthy. The beast leaned closer, its featureless head tilting in a way that made my stomach churn. Its claws twitched, razor sharp and impossibly long. I could feel its breath, hot, wet, and rancid, rolling over me like waves of decay. Spill blood, the woman repeated, her voice almost soothing. It's a small price to pay. I looked down at the knife in my hand, the metal trembling as I held it. I could still see the blood smeared on the blade from when I slashed the masked figure's arm. It wasn't much, just a small streak of red, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I thought about Emily, about how they'd gotten to her so easily, about how helpless I felt. Then I looked at the beast again. Its claws twitched impatiently, dragging deep grooves into the floor. Its head tilted further, and for the first time, I heard it make a sound. It wasn't a growl or a snarl. It was laughter, a low, guttural chuckle that bubbled up from its chest, echoing in the room like a broken machine. My body felt like it was shutting down. Every instinct screamed at me to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped between the knife in my hand and the monster standing in front of me. And then the beast spoke. Its voice wasn't a voice. It didn't come from its mouth. Hell, it didn't even have one. It came from everywhere. It seeped into my head like smoke, filling every corner of my mind with words that weren't words. Choose, it whispered, or I will choose for you. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it would crack my ribs. I turned to the masked figures, desperate for some kind of guidance, some kind of answer, but they didn't move. They just stayed there, kneeling in silence, their masks reflecting the flickering light. I tried to speak, but my voice came out in a rasp. What happens if I don't? The beast tilted its head again, its claws twitching in anticipation. The shadows around it seemed to ripple, growing darker, thicker, like ink spreading through water. The woman on the speaker answered instead. If you don't choose, the beast will feast, and it will not stop with you. I didn't need her to spell it out. If I didn't do what they wanted, Emily was as good as dead. My stomach twisted as I thought about her, about how she'd been sitting in that cafe, completely unaware of the danger she was in, about how I dragged her into this nightmare just by being curious, just by clicking that stupid link. I had to do it. I didn't have a choice. My hand shook as I raised the knife, the blade catching the flickering light. The beast didn't move, but I could feel its attention on me, heavy and oppressive. I stared at the blade, then at my other hand, my own blood. That's what I'd give. If I gave them what they wanted, maybe they'd let me and Emily go. Maybe this would all be over. But as I pressed the blade to my palm, the beast growled, low and guttural. No, it whispered, its voice 1,000 voices overlapping. Not yours. I froze. What? Not yours, the beast repeated, its words dripping with hunger. Hers. My stomach dropped. No, you can't. She is your test, the woman's voice interrupted. Her life is your sacrifice. Her blood will bind you to us. Prove your devotion. The room spun. I staggered back, clutching the knife like it was a lifeline, but I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. Spill her blood, the woman said again, calm and unyielding, or the beast will spill both of yours. The beast took a step closer, its claws clicking against the floor. The sound was slow, deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. No, I whispered, shaking my head. You can't make me. We're not making you do anything, the woman replied. The choice is yours. My hands trembled as I looked at the photo of Emily, still lying on the chair. Her face was so normal, so alive. I could almost hear her voice in my head, the way she'd laugh whenever I tried to act tough. How could they expect me to do this? How could they expect me to kill my own sister? But the beast kept advancing, its claws dragging across the floor. The shadows around it grew darker, swallowing the light. You have 10 seconds, the woman said. I don't know what happened next. One moment, I was standing there, the knife shaking in my hand. The next, I was screaming, lunging forward, slashing wildly at the nearest masked figure. The blade caught them across the throat, and blood sprayed across the plastic sheet. They crumpled to the floor, clutching at their neck, but I didn't stop. I turned on the second figure, stabbing them in the chest. The third figure backed away, but I chased them down, tackling them to the floor and driving the knife into their stomach, over and over and over. When I finally stopped, my hands were drenched in blood. The beast was gone. I stumbled back, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was silent now, except for the faint crackle of the speaker. You've made your choice, the woman said, her voice cold. I dropped the knife, my hand shaking uncontrollably. I didn't mean to. I didn't. But the speaker went silent. The room began to darken, the flickering light above me dimming until it was nothing but shadows. And then I heard the growl. The growl was low at first, like a deep rumble vibrating through the floor. But it grew louder, more feral, more alive. My chest tightened as I whipped around, searching for the source. The beast was back. I didn't see it at first, not fully. The shadows in the room had thickened into something unnatural, swallowing the walls and floor, twisting reality. My reflection in the knife I dropped disappeared. It was like light itself refused to exist here anymore. The air was heavier, suffocating, carrying that same rancid smell of rot and sulfur. Then I saw it. The beast's outline emerged from the darkness, taller than before, its limbs stretched unnaturally long. It didn't walk. It unfolded from the shadows, its featureless face turning toward me. I tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. My feet caught on the plastic sheeting, slick with blood, and I stumbled. The knife was just out of reach, glinting faintly in the dim light. It didn't lunge at me. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough. My body felt frozen, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of it. The beast didn't have eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. It saw through me, and it spoke again, not with words, but with that voice in my head, curling through my thoughts like smoke. "You have chosen," it whispered, "and now you will take your place." The speaker crackled to life one last time. The woman's voice was there, soft and almost proud. "You've proven yourself," she said. "Few make it this far. Even fewer survive. But you've spilled blood for us. You've faced the beast. You've shown you're willing to do what is necessary." I could barely breathe. My hands were still shaking, covered in blood, most of it not mine. What do you want from me?" I croaked. She ignored the question. "Congratulations. You've earned your invitation to the true elite." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, I didn't." "You did," she interrupted. "You made your choice, and now you belong to us." The beast stepped closer, its claws dragging across the floor, leaving deep, smoldering grooves. I tried to crawl backward, but the shadows behind me shifted and twisted, cutting off my escape. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to." The beast leaned down, its faceless void just inches from mine. The smell of decay hit me like a brick, and I gagged, and then it whispered something that froze me to my core. "Your place is earned, but your price is yet unpaid." The plastic sheet beneath me rippled like it was alive. The blood I'd spilled started to spread, forming intricate patterns, circles within circles, symbols I didn't recognize. The beast's claws reached out, not for me, but for the bodies of the masked figures I'd killed. It dragged them into the center of the room, arranging them with a grotesque precision. Their blood pooled and joined the symbols, glowing faintly as the beast moved. It didn't speak, but I could feel its satisfaction, its hunger growing with every movement. "Stop," I whimpered, my voice barely audible. "Please, stop." The woman's voice cut through the air again. "There is no stopping now. The contract is sealed. The price must be paid." I felt the floor beneath me shift. The blood-soaked plastic turned to something colder, harder, stone. The symbols etched themselves into the surface, glowing brighter and brighter until the light burned my eyes. And then they spoke. Not the woman, not the beast, the symbols. Thousands of voices, overlapping and twisting together, screaming in languages I couldn't understand. It was deafening, a chorus of agony and rage that shook the walls. I clutched my head, trying to block it out, but the sound wasn't coming from the air. It was inside my skull, worming its way into my thoughts, my memories. "You are chosen," the voices said, their tone rising and falling like a twisted symphony. "You will serve. You will ascend." The beast turned to me, its claws dripping with black ichor. For the first time, I saw something like emotion in its movements. Glee, hunger, triumph. It reached out, one claw hovering inches from my chest, and then it plunged into me. The pain was instant, blinding. I screamed, my body arching as the claw pierced through my chest and into something deeper, something I didn't even know I had. My vision blurred, my senses overwhelmed by the burning, searing heat spreading through my body. I saw flashes of things I couldn't explain. Cities crumbling, oceans boiling, shadows consuming entire worlds. And through it all, I felt the beast's presence, growing stronger, feeding on my pain, my fear. "You will serve," it whispered again, its voice curling around my mind. "You will obey." When I woke up, I was outside. The sun was rising. casting long shadows across the empty street. My clothes were soaked in blood, my hands trembling as I stared at them. The building was gone. There was nothing behind me but an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. I stumbled to my feet, my head spinning. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out with shaking hands. There was a single notification, a text. "Welcome to the true elite." Underneath, there was a link. It led to a new site, with the same black background and white text as before. At the top of the page, there was a single message. "Your next task will arrive soon. Do not fail." I dropped the phone, my chest tightening as the weight of it all crashed down on me. They weren't done with me. This wasn't over. And the worst part? I could still feel the beast. It was inside me now, lurking in the corners of my mind, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. Its hunger was endless, insatiable, and I knew it wouldn't stop until it had consumed everything. I should have never clicked that link. Edit. I don't know how long I have before they contact me again. I've tried to go to the police, but every time I start to explain, the words die in my throat. It's like the beast won't let me speak about it directly. If anyone out there finds a site called trueeliteaccess.onion, don't click it. Don't even think about it. Because once you're chosen, there's no way out.